it's very, very good to have new blood coming into our discussion. I'm sure that you're bringing a whole range of new insights, new views, and we are very much interested in hearing you. Now let me give you a few elements. Alexandre Pérez is Spanish, and is co-founder and president of the Alpius Society at Oxford in the United Kingdom. He also has been a venture capitalist. So he has been investing and developing enterprise. And it has a broader interest on issues of international political economy. Because he has organized a whole range, throughout a whole range of meetings that have furthered our discussion about these topics. Professionally, he has had contributions and been part of, I'm not going to give all the details, but he has been part of a strategy consultant at McKinsey, Goldman Sachs in New York. So has plenty of experience, and from the year 2000 to 2012, he was a student at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where he earned his MBA. Now, after that, you went to Harvard and to the Kennedy School of Government, where he graduated with a Master in Public Administration. So that gives you the postgraduate work that Alexandre has done, building up on top of his studies at the University of Valladolid in Spain, where he got a master and a BSc in industrial engineering. So you're one of those who is very much in the engineering background, more than the economics, but somehow you moved away. So it has got many prizes, but I'm not going to take all the time giving you the details of this. Only welcome, Alexandre. We are very, very much grateful that you have agreed to come.
I'll stand up because I'm a little bit small, so I think it's better for me to be able to see you. Well, thank you very much, Raúl, for that very nice introduction and for inviting me to come here. Indeed, what you mentioned of mixing young people with more experienced professionals and researchers lays at the foundation of Altius at Oxford. That was our original idea, which was to try to bring in those debates people with younger ideas, with people with a more mature point of view, and also bringing people from different disciplines, from philosophy to pure research, scientific research, to politicians, policymakers, decision-makers, and people from business. And that's really what I'm going to try to bring here to the conversation. The topic, the brain of the future, which seems a little bit diffuse. In particular, I'm going to try to focus on the artificial aspect, the artificial brain of the future, and how that relates to the future of global economic governance, politics, in this age of the new thinking machines. So first, when I took the presentation, someone asked, you put the wrong presentation to talk about the brain of the future, which is actually the right presentation. And you will see now why, because this is extremely connected. During the weekend, and this is just before starting, during the weekend, I don't know if you were aware, but on Friday there was the inauguration of Donald Trump as President of the United States. And right after that, the New York Times published, and some other media, a picture trying to compare the crowds in the Obama inauguration with a picture in the inauguration of Trump. This was taken at the same time during the inauguration, so in a way it could be more or less comparable in terms of data. Well, the reaction from Trump was not unpredictable. Indeed, I'm going to put here an extract from his new press secretary, Sean Spicer, on Saturday.
Even the New York Times printed a photograph showing that a misrepresentation of the crowd in the original tweet in their paper would show the full extent of the support, depth, and crowd and intensity that existed. These attempts to lessen the enthusiasm of the inauguration are shameful and wrong. This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period, both in person and around the globe.
Well, obviously right after that, all the press started to react saying, how could this be that the press secretary of the White House would go out saying something that is so easy to counter-argue? Well, this was the answer that his campaign manager, now senior advisor to the president, gave to the journalists.
Cues, and you did not answer the question.
I did answer
No, you did not. You did not
Yes, I
answer
did.
the question of why the president asked the White House press secretary to come out in front of the podium for the first time and utter a falsehood. Why did he do that? It undermines the credibility of the entire White House press office
No,
on
it
day
doesn't.
one.
Don't be so overly dramatic about it, Chuck. You're saying it's a falsehood, and they're giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that. But the point remains that there's...
Alternative facts, 4 of the 5 facts he uttered. The
Hey,
one
Chuck,
thing 4 of the 5 facts he uttered were just not true. Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
Chuck, do you think it's a fact or not that millions of people have lost their plans, their health insurance, and their doctors under President Obama? Do you think...
Well, let's stop it here. So why is that alternative facts are being so effective? Because this could be a strategy that could have been used in previous elections. However, there is a reason why in this particular election cycle it's been very effective, and we'll see later why this is the case. So to talk about the new age of cognitive machines, I will start giving a brief historical perspective. The idea of robot is a word that comes from the Czech writer Karel Kopek, which basically in a play at the beginning of the 20th century, which was very interesting because it was about a factory where androids could replace humans and could do the work 2.5 times the work of a human by much lower cost of them. So actually the word robot comes from the word robota, which means hard work, let's say drudgery, the bad stuff that you do associated to work. Not the sophisticated work, but the routine work. Well, this has been the traditional association with robotization and automation, which is you leave to the human some creative activities, and then you are surrounded by different tools performed by machines to help you in those higher level cognitive tasks. But it seems there is no question, and we started to have a brief debate with Professor Barile about what are the limitations of that. Indeed, here is a picture of Rembrandt, which is exposed in the museum in Amsterdam, which, when you look at it in person, you can appreciate the rocks of the painting. So it's not only a matter of the picture, which of course it has an amazing expression, but even when you go close to it, you can feel, when you look at the little details, that there is a human trying to express something. Everybody seems to agree that this seems to be a limitation to what a machine can actually do. We are going to get deeper on this one. So to continue with the historical perspective, based on these limitations, some economists are arguing that the innovation we are seeing today is on a much lower scale of innovation we have seen in the past. The argument goes something like this. If you were given to choose between having sanitized water with sugar and pipes and so on, having to avoid going and walking with the water from the street and your excrements when you do your personal affairs, and choosing between that and having an iPhone with connection to Google, to those artificial intelligence machines to help you in your day-by-day life, what would you choose? Well, that line of argument seems to be a little bit weak, but he uses to argue that the growth in the future is going to be much lower than the growth in the productivity in the past. part of the discussion goes around what has been the most impactful inventions in the history of humanity. And when you look at the problem, some people argue that the main disruptions happened with the main philosophical movements, religions, even politicians or emperors, the Roman Empire, Mongol Empire, Ottoman Empire. Some disruptions in the negative sense, such as the Black Death, discoveries, such as the discovery of the New World, scientific discoveries, such as calculus, or even artistic periods, such as Renaissance. Well, going back to my engineering background, one way to look at this is to look at the numbers and try to see which of those actually had some sort of impact in some parameters. Of course, understanding the complexity of the problem, because sometimes some of these elements are interconnected, or there are some delays in the impact of those discoveries. Well, there are hundreds of hours of debates that you can play around it. The reality is that it seems that nothing mattered of all those, except by something that occurred at the end of the 18th century, 19th century, and beginning of the 20th century. When you look especially not only world population, that someone mentioned on Wednesday, but also to some social development indexes, which not only include GDP, but include other measures of social development, such as access to healthcare, use of energy, and so on. Well, the reality is that that key shift was related to what some researchers call the first machine age. Leaving aside the concept of the first and the second industrial revolution, let's simplify. I group everything under the umbrella of that first machine age. In that first machine age, basically, humans were supported by machines in going beyond the physical limitations of their human or animal capacities. The question is, what will happen in the future? But to illustrate the magnitude of this change, and the change that is happening right now, at the Oxford New Economic Institute, and in collaboration with them, we did some exercises during our conference 2 years ago. And using the philosophy of Henry David Thoreau, that says something like, the true price of anything is the amount of life that you are willing to exchange for that. Based on that, instead of measuring GDP, which seems to have some limitations, the analysis was around the number of hours, in this particular example, necessary to pay for 1 hour of reading light. Well, at the beginning of the 19th century, you have to work 5 hours to have 1 hour of reading light at night. By the end of the 19th century, because of the kerosene lamps, with 13 minutes of work, you will have 1 hour of light. 1960s, 3.4 minutes. 92, 0.4 seconds. Today, less than a blink of an eye. So you work in your office for just this, and you had enough income to pay for enough to pay 1 hour of reading light at night. So this is a way to try to identify these economic metrics with some other magnitudes that seems closer to what actually society are feeling. If you look at extreme poverty, which seems to be a more aggregated metric, you see that the change since the beginning of the 19th century till the 20th century was relevant. Indeed, it was the biggest improvement in history. But then, since the 1980s to the last year, in 2015 was the first year in history that the level of extreme poverty went below 10% of the world population. This is particularly challenging because it happened during a period in which population went from around 1 billion people to over 7 billion people. So not only the share of population below the poverty line went down dramatically, but the amount of people that we were able to give them those basic needs, like food, increased dramatically. In terms of inequality at the global level, we will later on talk about the individual level, the dynamic change has been incredible, moving from an almost binormal distribution to now approaching the normal distribution, basically due to the rise of China, a little bit India, and some other Asian countries and Latin America, but mainly because of the contribution of China. In terms of life expectancy, the UK, over centuries, life expectancy around or below 40 years old, and in the last 2 centuries, roughly doubled to over 80 years old. Similar behaviors around other European countries. When you look at the global scale, this is the 1800s, everybody quite equally bad. Then by the 1950s, some strong improvements, particularly in what we call now the developed world, with the average in the world at 48 years, and then in the last 6 decades, an improvement, basically a catch-up, but continuing the improvement in the developed world, so that the average went from 48 to 70 years old. Basically, in 60 years, we improved more than in the previous 150 years, in which we improved more than in all the history of humanity. And this was all mainly related to the effect that we mentioned, that was the first age of machines. What comes now? The age of cognitive machines, surpassing the human in what he can do with his cognitive limitations. And here I want to propose what, in my opinion, is one of the key changes in the last 10 years. And this is a change in the paradigm in how we do artificial intelligence. Basically, when we think of artificial intelligence, the first thing that comes to many people's mind is that moment in which a machine was able to beat the master at chess, Kasparov, in 1996. For me, the interesting thing was not that the machine was able to beat the human. The interesting thing here is that the human was almost able to beat the machine, taking into account that the human is being able to do much more things than what the machine is able to do. You put this machine to do something else than playing chess, it will not give any results. However, a human is very good in some other things and almost able to beat the machine in 1996 with much more capacity of computational capacity. Why is that? Well, this makes me think that we haven't seen anything yet because of this change of paradigm. The change of paradigm goes something like this. Basically, we move from the concept of Turing machines to inference machines. In simple terms, without going into mathematics, the idea of the old paradigm of Turing machines goes that you have a machine, like a microprocessor, where you program certain operations, you have some data or inputs, and then you have, as a result of those operations, the outputs. So you program, for example, when you have 1 plus 1 equals 2. So every time the machine sees a 1 plus 1, then says, okay, answer is 2. Of course, you increase the complexity of those operations, you give it a speed, and you can make a lot of calculations. But it doesn't seem to be very creative, in a way. Well, the new paradigm is completely, radically different. And it's much more similar to the way humans think. How a baby learns to speak. It learns by integration of different experiences, observations, along its life, and based on that accumulation of data, in a way, on its neural network, it derives some conclusions which are not black or white, typically are gray up to a certain degree. Let me put you here a video to illustrate. So basically here you have the baby with its mother, and the mother will start to show some objects, and to explain what is a glass, the mother will not say a glass is a cylindric object that has an opaque thing at the bottom and an aperture at the top where you can pour fluids. No. This is a glass. This is a bottle. That's a truck, and so on. And by trial and error, the kid starts to learn. Sometimes it makes mistakes and says, oh, this is a glass. And the mother says, no, this is not a glass, this is a plate. Well, Crick made this astonishing, the book Astonishing Hypothesis a couple of decades ago, very interesting, that argues that the person's mental activities are entirely due to the behavior of nerve cells and the molecules that make them up and influence them. Well, this has been refuted. I was debating about this with Professor Barile a few minutes ago. But the concept behind this is that the structure of the brain is very powerful. Basically, in the brain, the way you work is you have a real world. You have a few neurons that are exposed to these inputs, for example, the baby with the eyes, and then through a series of layers which give more complexity, you start to recognize high-level concepts. For example, you start to recognize colors, then shapes, then combinations of shapes, and then higher-level concepts, even going to the extreme of sensations, feelings, and behavioral concepts. You can take this to the artificial world, building networks of neurons that are basically mathematical constructs that you connect through mathematical weights to give a certain output. The big change happened, in the 60s, this is an old concept. This was not invented this decade. Even in the 60s, people started to play around these techniques. Indeed, they realized that there were many limitations. In the 70s, there was like an AI winter, And then in the 80s, with the new computing power, using these techniques, they started to build multi-layer networks that started to provide some efficiency. I'm not going to enter into mathematics, but basically the idea is that understanding things like language cannot be achieved because of the complexity with a rule-based method in which you program the computer to translate or to interpret words or sounds. You have to use this bottom-up approach in which concepts emerge. This is what Google, with DeepMind, actually DeepMind, that was a startup based in the UK, did a few years ago. And the concept is basically to replicate those brain behaviors with artificial neurons connected in a very complicated array, and then start to expose that network to a number, in this case, of images. This is a technique that also Facebook is using. This is from Facebook. You expose the network to images. You say, well, these are images that correspond to the same individual. Then you expose some other pictures that correspond to different individuals, and you say who is who. And by continuing this process of exposition to a number of images, you start to detect, or the network starts to detect, what characterizes a cat, a dog, glasses, a banana, and so on, up to the level in which, after some days, weeks of training, you expose the machine to the images, and it tells you, well, this seems to be a banana. I'm not 100% certain, but based on what I've learned, it seems almost certain that it's a banana, the same way as a baby does. So basically, this framework is called reinforced learning framework, in which you have the agent, which is exposed through the environment observations, and then it takes some actions, and then with this feedback loop, it starts to train the brain network. This is an example that I love. I guess many people in this room, because of the age, have played this game. Basically, it's very simple. You take this machine, and you have to kill the invaders, but you need to be careful not to be killed. Well, before training, the machine is doing as a human. The machine doesn't know anything. It only sees pictures, and it doesn't know how to play the game, no laws of physics, no mathematics, nothing. It just plays with the control and sees what happens. After some training, now you start to see, well, he learned that by putting it behind here, he avoids the hit. Then he learns that by hitting the invaders, he raises the punctuation, which is its goal. That's the only parameter. You need to maximize the punctuation. And by playing a little bit more, it reaches a point. You see that it starts to become a little bit masterful. You see that it's able even to hit quite complicated moves that even for a human would be complicated. Did you see that last hit? Completely non-programmed, no laws of physics or mathematics. And this one is even more powerful. Very simple game. There is a ball. If the ball passes, you lose one life, and you need to maximize how many points you can get. The more points, more quickly you can hit, the higher the level you can reach. So basically, after 300 games, it reaches more or less the level of a human player. Again, no rules whatsoever. And then, after a few more hours, something unexpected happens. It discovers a way, by destroying this barrier, to actually maximize the speed at which it collects the points. Something that even the programmers of the game didn't thought this could be a behavior that could emerge. Well, right after showing this example, Google, in 2014, said these groups of researchers, it was at that time less than 30, based in London, are worth more than $500 million. They bought them immediately. What they have done since then is going beyond playing backgammon, chess, that of course was a problem that was resolved in the at the end of the 1990s, and went to the more challenging, this is the chess game. In the chess game, every time that you play, you have a set number of possibilities in the board. It's big, but you can, by brute force, execute the game. But in Go, by each movement of the game, you have hundreds of different next moves. So basically, when you accumulate the different possibilities, you get more possibilities on the board than particles are there in the universe. So basically, but brute force, it's completely impossible to solve this problem. That's why everybody thought it was going to be impossible to use artificial intelligence to beat a human master, because actually it requires a strategy. The strategy basically in the game is that you need to surround your enemy. This is a super old game, it has thousands of years coming from Asia. And basically with those strategic principles, and by experience and intuition, training with masters, you start to develop those learnings that the machine, by observing hundreds of plays of masters overnight, because it doesn't have those limitations of the human, they started to train the machine first observing the human, and then playing against itself for a few hours, and then after a few months, it was able to beat the global master. It was such a moment that basically the master was almost, you could see the face. This was following the television in South Korea. Hundreds of millions of people in Asia were watching this game. This was last year, in 2016, super recent. I'm sure many of you have read this in the Financial Times or other news outlets. Facebook is doing something similar with the Facebook AI research. So basically you have the combination of this new paradigm of artificial intelligence with, of course, the everybody's known extended Moore's law, increasing computational power, by which every few years you are doubling the computing power. But this is just one part of the equation. I just wanted to highlight, this is important, everybody talks about it, but the most important thing, in my opinion, is the combination of this with the change of the paradigm. Just to illustrate, a gaming console for one of your kids has more power than what the US government had in the 90s, just on your kids' gameplay. Basically because of exponential. To give an illustration, because some people I know they don't come from the scientific background of what's the scale of this exponentiality. If you give 30 exponential steps, basically 30 years of development, in which in each year you double your power, after 3 decades, so from when I was born till today, you have made an improvement of 1 billion times. To put it in physical terms, if you give 1 step, after 30 steps, you do in linear way, you do 30 meters, from there to probably the end of the hallway, but if you do in an exponential way, after those 30 steps, you gave several times around the world. Well, hardware companies building on this technology, like NVIDIA, that originated as a developer of hardware technology for video games, now is developing hardware specifically designed for deep learning and machine learning. I just want to illustrate, the magnitude of improvement is incredible. In 2015, in their conference, they presented a machine that in 5 hours could learn to identify images. This is a process, you start to observe images, and you can surpass the capabilities of a human in identifying those images. Now, 2016, in just 2 hours, 1 year later, in just 2 hours, they do the same amount of learning. So we go back to the Rembrandt picture. This picture of Rembrandt, which is in the exhibition at Amsterdam, is actually made by a machine. It's even painted by a machine, by a 3D printer. So what the machine did is they started to propose a lot of images to the machine with some concepts associated to those images, and then they started to ask, okay, can you please paint me with that style? Can you please paint me like a landscape? And that's what it gives you in a fraction of a second. With some trees, there you have it. With a beach, there you have it. This is real. This is actually in real time. This is the machine generating the pictures that in the past you would ask that painter to do, and in a few months he would come back with the painting. Of course, it's debatable the element of creativity in those generations of artistic pieces, but that's for another debate. You apply that technology to translation. I was in Turkey a few months ago, and when I was speaking to the taxi driver, I took my iPhone and I started speaking in Spanish, and the iPhone started speaking in Turkish. Actually, the taxi driver was frightened because what's going on here? I mean, I was speaking, and then he would speak in Turkish, and the iPhone immediately would speak to me in Spanish, so we could communicate. what's going to happen with translators? Then different applications in games. I'm going to skip through this. That piss us off all the time. This is something that is going to completely revolutionize these services. Automatic replies through text messages when you have a problem. Incredible improvements just in the last year. Also in the physical world, for example, Amazon is completely improving their physical facilities of logistics. The self-driving car, which is clearly a whole revolution. I'm just going to show you, this is the model of Tesla that this year announced that all their new cars are going to have the hardware ready to be fully autonomous in 2 or 3 years, but now you buy the hardware and it's ready. So overnight, one day, you will update the software and the machine will know how to drive better than you. This is an experiment with a Tesla car and a woman.
Oh, this car is coming! Oh, this car is... Bill, this... Put me back from me control it! Oh, dear Jesus! I could never... Oh, where's it going?
Of course, there are some issues for the human and machine interaction.
Oh, my God! Oh, this is so scary. Oh, Jesus, this is my first day out. I'm about to die.
Oh, come on, relax.
Oh, my God, Bill. I couldn't do it. Oh, is the car coming? Oh, my God, they're going to hit it. Oh,
You see that the instinct
Get some brakes.
stop right here before the crash. So, of course, now Google is trying to work on making this much more friendly, human-friendly, so that it doesn't create this sort of frightened in slightly older people. But basically the concept, and I know that in the previous talk, there was a deep conversation about the future of combining these technologies with medicine. So what are the implications of this age of thinking machines for employment and the broader economy and politics? One thing very important. First, I want to focus the time frame. In the first phase that we spoke before, the machines were able to replicate humans in what they do in routine tasks. In the second phase, which is the phase that we are living right now with these examples, machines are replacing humans in what we do with our intermediate cognitive tasks, such as driving a car. There is another phase which I'm not going to discuss, which goes maybe something around the next 2 decades to the next 5 or 6 decades, in which machines are even able to replicate some of the behaviors that we do with our advanced cognitive capabilities. But the focus for me is here. Why? Because even if this future looks very appealing, having a car that when you go out of this conference and you have to go to the airport, because it listens to what you are doing, it knows that now you have to go to the airport. You go out and the car is waiting, you didn't have to ask for it, and it drives you to the airport, and instead of paying 48 euros, you pay 8 euros. This is not like a dream. This will actually happen in a few years. Depending on regulation, it will be adopted earlier or later, but if the regulation permits, this type of technology will be here. This is what will happen in the next 15 to 20 years, and the problem is that if from an organizational point of view of our society, we don't solve some challenges that are associated to that, we may not get to this next phase. That's why for me, the question, and part of the research that needs to be done in the next years, is what can you do to try to make sure that we do not fail along this path because of the political implications. So the first impact is superabundance. Basically the cost of enjoying many goods, clothes, computers, even food, is decreasing dramatically. In terms of productivity numbers, figures, in the last 10 years, the productivity, even with the crisis, this is US data, was even above the average of the increase in productivity per year since the second industrial revolution. So that first phase that I mentioned at the beginning, this is an analysis done by McKinsey in which they compare the historical increase in productivity in the last 5 decades and compare it to the impact of these technologies in the future. And what you see is that in the past, the historical increase in growth, not per capita, but general growth per year, is 3.5 per year. Half of it was roughly based on productivity growth, and half of it driven by demographics, employment growth. In the future, the contribution by demographics is going to be, on average, roughly zero. So most of the work needs to come from increases in productivity. Well, the good news is that only through artificial intelligence we'll be able to get something between 1.4 to 0.8 points of increase in productivity per year. To put it in perspective, this range is higher than the increase in productivity even from any of the technologies of that first phase that I mentioned before. Two issues. One, measurement. In this new economy, it's a little bit difficult to measure what's good and what's bad for society. The example is US recorded music. At the end of the 2000s, the consumption per capita of recorded music, even digital, was around $26. At the beginning of that decade, $71 per capita. At the same time, at the end of the decade, we have the peak number in hours of consumption of music per capita. So, were we better off at the end of the decade or at the beginning of the decade? At the end of the decade, contribution to GDP was much lower. It was less than half. Music industry was contributing less than half to GDP. However, people were consuming more than double the number of hours of music than at the beginning of the decade. So, is it useful to use GDP to measure the lifestyle of the population? That's the question there. The second issue is the gap in the distribution that this is creating, of the benefits of this AI transformation. Here, this is the long-term evolution of GDP in the US. Here you see the effect of the recent recession. And these lines, without entering into details, is the evolution of the corporate profits indexed. They are roughly at an all-time high. However, red line, in terms of participation on employment, we are at historical lows, US data. But the forecasts for the future are even worse. If you project working age population and the needs of jobs based on this increase in productivity, the gap doesn't do more than increasing. Indeed, the MIT lab did a recalculation 2 years ago, and they realized that this projection was wrong. Actually, the gap is going to be much bigger. So basically, if we take this paradigm of creators, displaced workers, and consumers, which not only happen around one system, it happens around many systems. You have one technology, for example, the cars, fantastic for consumers. You will be able to go to Fiumicino with €8. Fantastic. And it will not cheat you. It will be working perfectly fine. The founder of Uber, or Tesla, doing fantastically well as many of their engineers. But then you have a number of displaced workers that will have some issues. Of course, it happens across a number of sectors. Typically in history, this has not been a problem because the equilibrium between short-term and long-term dynamics is such that in the short term you have a disruption, but then in the long term, people find new things to do over their lifetime so that there is a new equilibrium that is reasonable for society. Question is, what's going to happen now? What's going to be that new long-term equilibrium? Is it going to be really one equilibrium that is acceptable for society? Well, this is the data. Well, this is just an example of the CEO of Uber. He said something a little bit controversial. He said the reason Uber could be sometimes expensive is because you are not just paying for the car. This is literal. You are paying for the other dude in the car. When there is no other dude, the cost of taking an Uber anywhere becomes even cheaper than owning a vehicle. And then he added, this will happen this decade. Well, this is the example of Amazon store starting this quarter in Seattle. Incredible. You get into the store, there is nobody. You go in, you take things, and you leave. Why? Because it recognizes you through artificial vision. It knows who you are. It knows what objects are you taking. If you think about it and you put it back, it knows that you are putting it back. Not very complicated, but it's very important, the artificial vision. This was completely impossible 5 years ago. So basically, you leave the store, no need to talk to anyone, and then you have all the details, no errors. Another sector. Well, you see the point, right? So the argument is that this time the point of long-term equilibrium may not be a socially acceptable outcome. Why? When you look at the agricultural revolution, it took actually a couple or 3 centuries in England for the transformation to happen. Of course, we went from a huge share of the population, close to 60% working agriculture, to now below 2%. But this was a process in which you could die several times during the transformation. So the need to adapt yourself or to retrain during your lifetime because of technology was somehow limited. This was, of course, increased during the Industrial Revolution. That's why you had the Luddite movements, but still they were able again to readapt. But look at the numbers. 3.6 million professional drivers in the US. Is the occupation that occupies more people in the US. Tax advisors, because of the software, last 3 years, 30% have already lost their business to the software. You look at the ranking of occupations and you start to see, and all these occupations, transportation, retail, salespersons, first and supervised cashiers, secretaries, managers, well, that's different, we'll talk about that. So basically, most of these occupations that have existed for decades, for the first time, we are certain that in the next 2 decades, most of them, with the current technology, not future technology, have a very high degree of likelihood to be replaced. There was a very detailed analysis at the Oxford Martin School with McKinsey that went occupation by occupation, and the summary number, to give a number, was that about 51% of unemployment is in a very high risk of being replaced in the next 15 to 20 years. The worst thing is that this has already started. You look at the growth in productivity over the last 60 years and then employment, and you start to see here the gap in the last couple of decades. Productivity keeps increasing, everything is more productive in the economy, but private employment stagnant. Participation, this is corrected by gender. In the US, employment going down, not only because of the crisis, this is a secular trend. Wages, very visual element. General productivity, and in the last 3 decades, average real wages, US data, stagnant. So what are the political implications? This chart, how many people know this chart? This is the elephant chart from Branko Milanovic. Interesting. Probably this is the most important chart, in my opinion, of 2015. It's extremely powerful. What this tells you is everybody in the world, by the poorest person in the world to the richest, sorted from less to more, how much their income has increased over the last 3 decades, roughly. The interesting part is that the bottom 70% of the world did reasonably okay. This is mostly people in China, Mexico, India, etc. The top 1%, 2%, did very well as well. But the people in what he calls the Valley of Despair, which is the lower part of the trunk of the elephant, didn't really improve at all. What's the issue? That who are these people that didn't do well in the last 3 decades? These are the middle and low class income people in the US, in Europe, in the OECD countries, which in democratic systems, these are the majority of the people that vote. On the other side of the equation, you look at the top companies by market capitalization, and in a decade, you move from being oil companies, banks, and so on, to all of them, the top 5, being technology companies, just in 1 decade. And this just started. And when you look at the details, each point of this is one occupation, how much money you make per hour, $60 to $10 per hour, and in the vertical is what's the likelihood of automatability based on the current technology. And you see that the red line is the average on its hourly wage. So you see that the very expensive tasks typically are harder to automatize. Strategic thinking, they are still hard to automatize. The very basic, sometimes they are hard. For example, a hairdresser is complicated. But the worst part is that the hairdresser earns a little income. This is the green line. So basically, when you compound both effects, the blue line is actually the return on investment on automation. So what this tells you is that the middle and the low income class are the highest incentive of automation for investors in this type of technologies. What's the result of this? That basically these are the people that are first suffering the effects of this technological transformation. Now it starts to begin easier to understand what's going on here. A few articles talking about robots are all around, they are starting to take our jobs. Numbers are staggering. Increases on wages, on households. How many households are better off after a decade than at the beginning of the decade? From 1993 to 2005, almost no household in OECD countries, mostly OECD countries, were worse off. In the last decade, 65 to 70% had flat or lower income at the end of the decade. This is market numbers, then adjusted by social programs of redistribution. Still is a big number, 20 to 25% of the population were equal or worse than at the beginning. And this is incredible, by level of education. So for students that are here, that there are really a few, I mean, at least this is a reason to be here. If you are a student of a bachelor's degree, or higher than a bachelor's degree, master education, or even higher education, your improvement in relative wages over the last 5 decades have been impressive. However, this is important. This is not just that you are better, it's that you improve more. This is the important aspect. At the beginning also, these people that had a master earn more. But the question is, what has changed? And why is this? Because if you have a lower degree, most likely to be replaced by a machine. In social aspects, this is just people like Ted. Ted is people, it represents a worker with a high degree education. Bill is a person that doesn't have high degree education. What happens to your family? Well, at the beginning of the 60s, 90% of them could make a decent living. Then people like Bill not only started worse, they decreased more. Happiness in their marriage. People like Ted, okay. People like Bill, a disaster. Voting in elections. The issue is that this is not updated by the last election. This has changed. And even going to prison. Important again, in the 70s, if you went to a higher education, almost no chance to end up in prison in the US. If you didn't, almost 200 more times likelihood of being in prison. But then they changed. They were much more affected than the others. So how can we solve it? Well, actually Gary Kasparov was asked this question in 1997. What would you do now to beat a machine? And he answered, well, I would take a hammer. That's one approach. Actually, a couple of years later, he organized a contest in Spain, actually, in León. That was a contest in which you could play together with a machine. And the interesting aspect is that when you work together with a machine, you can even beat, so there were 3 teams. Only a super machine, then only a super master, human master, and then an okay human with an okay machine. Bet who won? The combination. So very important to learn over the next 2 decades how to work together with these machines. Well, basically this becomes an issue of national security, because if in your country you don't have of this sector, forget about these programs. I don't know what the program is, the right program, universal rent, income, or negative tax, or that's a very long debate. But the point is, regardless of the program, it has a cost. To be able to do that program, if you don't have of this, there is nothing you can do. So this starts to become an issue of national security. I'm going to skip through this. Then the issue of asymmetric regulation. If in California you have a structure in your society, and in France or Spain you have a different structure where you are mostly affected by the technology, what happens when you have here with Uber? In Paris, this is a real story, they put a rule, it was worse than in Italy. In Italy, it was complete ban, but my understanding, then they changed. But in France, it was different. You could drive a Uber, but if you are in a Uber, when someone calls you, you need to wait 15 minutes with the car off, so that taxis could be competitive. Imagine, no? You have people waiting 15 minutes for no reason. Well, this was a whole mess. Actually, after a year, the regulation was turned down. And then a big debate between capital and work. I would just say, be careful with this debate. Because sometimes when we read this book, the book of Thomas Piketty, By the way, everybody talks about it, but I think almost nobody has read it because it's really hard to digest. It creates some confusion because it associates it with inherited wealth. That's not the problem. Actually, when you look at the top billionaires, for the first time in 2015, it happened that the number of billionaires that were first-time billionaires was higher than the ones that were inherited billionaires. So you look actually at the list, you look at the people, and you can identify the names, and you can see which ones have been connected to technology and which didn't. The ones that connected to technology, first time, the others not. So to finalize the systemic issues, basically, and we can talk about this on the panel discussion, but when you look at the system introduced by Marcus on Wednesday, and you think, yes, in society, in the US, in Europe, we have most of these elements of the structure. What's the problem that when you look at the system 5, for example, it's not only important to have it. What's the mechanism by which you elect who is occupying that position, so that it actually complies with the objectives of that position? That's one. Second, that Raúl made a reference yesterday, what's the mechanism of communication between the occupier of that position and the people that are actually suffering the consequences, and at the end deciding who occupies that position? And to finalize, why alternative facts are working? Again, artificial intelligence. You use Facebook, and believe it or not, but I'm sure some of you heard about this, and maybe someone mentioned this in some of the conversations. When you are on Facebook, your feed is personalized. So basically, the goal of Facebook, of their AI algorithm, is to maximize the time that you spend on their app, because that's what maximizes their profits because of the ads. The thing is that the time that you spend on the app is related with the engagement between you and the content. And the engagement, in this case, is constrained by this technology, which is a mobile device which is very small. And on that type of usage, our brain limitations, the endorphins that are segregated when you see something that you are interested in, make you click quickly on something that attracts your attention, even if it is garbage in terms of quality, because that's how we work. So this system keeps learning with a feedback loop in which you start by some news, and then at the end of the day, you end up with a feed in which all what you read is things that are on your network, obviously, but on your range of interest. So if you are a Trump supporter, and you get this, the Pope Francis, actually this was amazing, the Pope Francis didn't have other choice but to support Donald Trump because of the potential threat of Hillary Clinton, after 200 years of independence between the Vatican and the US elections, because there was no choice for the Pope. This was what the news would say if you click on it. This was shared, people saying, Pope endorses Trump, game changer, likes, shares, and so on. So how do you fix this? It's not easy, but you need a systemic solution to the problem. So this is why this alternative facts is working. They talk about it, but the thing is that people that watch CNN or NBC, they don't care about it. So it doesn't matter. It works, because they could say whatever, in the media they could say whatever, but people, today in the US, 60% of people consume most of their news from Facebook and YouTube. So what matters? What someone is saying on CNN. People that are voting you are not reading it. Indeed, the numbers tell you that the number of post engagements on Facebook on fake news was higher than the number of post engagements in mainstream news during this election cycle. This had never happened. So people read more fake information than real information. Indeed, people were surveyed after the vote, and a few million people in the US voted thinking that the Pope had decided to support them. This is the incredible element. So I hope, there are some pessimistic elements on this view of the next 2 or 3 decades, but I hope that we also see the positive potential for the global economy, which is amazing. I just can't think of that day that I can take that taxi for €8. But we need to start thinking in this context, and maybe this is of interest for future conference of WASP, to start to think what are the required changes in our systems to actually address the issues that we just mentioned. So, thank you very much.